Was the Constitution the culmination of the American Revolution? On one hand, we can say, of course. Of course. It was inevitable. It was inevitable that the revolutionaries would somehow or another eventually have to create this stronger national government. Hopefully by now, you know that I'm going to complicate that immediate answer by exploring other ways of thinking about it. I am first going to argue that we can look at the Constitution as a conservative coup d'etat. And then, having once made that case, I'll reverse course in some ways, and then argue that ultimately the Constitution does have a strong democratic meaning, and in that strong democratic meaning, it is in many ways the culmination of the American Revolution. So in other words, I'm going to argue from both sides. So let's talk first about the conservative coup d'etat. We'll start with perhaps what the more controversial of those claims, the coup d'etat, the overthrow of the state. And we can look at this in terms of three things. One, who called the convention. Two, the process of the convention. And three, the ratification process. Who called the convention? Well, I've already lectured that. I won't repeat everything I said in my earlier lecture, but the bottom line was there was no legal rationale, legitimate legal rationale to call the Constitutional Convention. A group of guys got together in Annapolis. They said, oh, these problems are so complicated, we ought to discuss revising the Constitution. Congress eventually said, okay, you guys can go discuss revision of the Constitution. States did agree to send delegates, but this whole process was sort of ad hoc. The actual convention, the actual meeting of the convention, they close the doors so that their discussions can be held in private. And then quickly, in this plot between the Virginia delegation and the Pennsylvania delegation, they quickly say, now we're going to rewrite a form of government. So the convention itself assumed a power. Again, just sort of imagine today the leading politicians of the day getting together, closing the doors, and then saying, let's create a new constitution. I don't think the nightly news would take to that. What? They won't let us know what's going on? What? They're changing the government? With no rational, no legal sort of sanction. Then when they're done, they write into that document a process for ratification. There was a legal mechanism set up in the Articles of Confederation to amend and change the Articles. Now, as it turns out, it was an extremely difficult thing to do, to change the Articles of Confederation, because in order to change it, every state had to agree. One state could pretty much veto any change. And during the 1780s, there had been an attempt to give Congress the power to issue an impost, a tax. And the first time this was done, I believe in 1782, Rhode Island vetoed it. The second time this was attempted, New York vetoed it. All the other states said, fine. So that does create a problem. And the only way to overcome that problem would be to sidestep the process. It doesn't mean sidestepping the process was constitutional. Do you follow that? In the Constitution, it says that once 9 states ratified the Constitution, which is a supermajority of 13, that's a significant majority of 13. It's not a bare majority. Once 9 states ratified it, the new government would be put into place. The only sort of legal sanction for that was the document itself. Moreover, the members of the Constitutional Convention thought there's no way the individual state legislators would accept this document. So what we will do is we'll create a process which will have state conventions, special representations of the people, which would decide whether or not to ratify the document or not. And then they quickly organized themselves, pushed through ratification in a number of states very quickly to create this momentum, taking the nation up to the brink of having 9 states. And of course, once 9 states ratify, the Articles of Confederation become defunct, and it's a choice of, do I join or not join? This can be considered a coup d'etat, an overthrow of the existing state. Now, whether it's a good thing or a bad thing, I'm not arguing, right? I think ultimately it was probably a good thing. But that's not the point. We need to look at it and understand it within the context of its times. And I might point out that opponents of the Constitution pointed this out at the time. Why do I say conservative? Okay, I will offer a definition of conservative. You can disagree or agree with this definition. But a conservative generally means, from my point of view as an historian, and the idea that what was in the past was good and workable, and let's keep as much of the past, let's conserve as much of the past as possible. All right, that's very generic kind of definition. And the reason why I say it is conservative is because in many ways the authors of the Constitution were attempting to conserve what they saw was the most workable plan of operating a government from the past. A plan which, to use James Madison's terms, would ensure, create a device by which the noblest characters would be extracted from society. A belief that there ought to be a kind of aristocracy. They did not believe that there ought to be an inherited aristocracy, but they believed that there was an aristocracy of talent, of wealth, of ability. And they were looking for ways to make sure these people, the noblest characters, would be placed in government. They actually were operating in many ways from what in the 18th century can be called the classical model of politics, where the best government was a balanced government, a government with an element of monarchy, a government of an element of aristocracy, and a government of an element of democracy. The president that emerges out of the Constitution is not a monarch. He's not elected for life. He doesn't inherit his positions, but he is given the powers, many of the powers that the King of England had also been given, with very significant controls, especially the ability to, his ability to veto laws was limited by the ability of the legislature to sort of pass those laws over his veto with a 2/3 majority. Right? So, but it was a kind of monarch. And the Senate, with its long 6-year terms, was kind of an aristocracy. And then theoretically, the Congress would represent the demos. I mean, this is sort of where they're operating from. These ideas are in flux, as we'll see in a minute or two. These ideas are shifting as to what exactly is going on. But this is where they're beginning from. And they're attempting to conserve this world. They're attempting to ensure that the noblest characters are extracted, taken from the mass of society, and put into control. And they do this through a series of devices. Again, a word that Madison uses. And the devices include the Electoral College. Now, every presidential election, we look at these presidential elections, we study these maps, and we're kind of going, what is this Electoral College? This is a bizarro way of electing a president. How many of you have ever asked yourself that question? Yes, most of us have. Well, the point is, the Electoral College was initially intended to create a filter whereby the people would maybe not know enough to choose the president, but they would know enough to choose the local big shots who get together and choose the president. So the whole series of these kinds of devices, which makes me argue for, that it is a conservative document. I could go on and talk about the Senate and how the Senate's elected by the states and not by the direct election. There's a whole variety of types of elements to the Constitution we could point to. But having said, we can look at the Constitution as a conservative coup d'etat, and hence not really a culmination of the revolution. We can step back and say, wait a second, isn't our government democratic? And my answer is affirmative. Yes, we do have a democratic government. And we have a democratic government for a variety of reasons. One, the Federalists were not entirely honest with the people. They sold them a bill of goods, and the only way they could really sell them the bill of goods is by saying, not we the states, we the big shots, but we the people of the United States of America. That phrase, which was created by Gouverneur Morris, is the most brilliant thing in the Constitution. It shifts the nature of things. And when the debates are going on, and this sort of pulls on earlier debates over state constitutions, and they're talking about things like, well, how can we give the president so much power? How can we have this monarch-like president? The response is, he's not really a monarch-like president. He represents the people. He no longer represents a monarchy. He represents the people. How can we give all this power to the Senate, this aristocratic body? No, it's not aristocratic. It's just another double representation of the people. And that all three elements of the sort of the government, the executive, the legislative, and even the judiciary to some degree, represent the interests of the people. And these ideas begin to be articulated somewhat in the Federalist Papers. These ideas begin to be articulated in the debates over the Constitution, infusing what on the surface, if you read it and actually try to think about what the thinking is behind the Constitution, infuses this Constitution with a democratic meaning. We can take this a step further and say, yes, indeed, the Constitution is a culmination of the revolution, because it's not just these arguments that count. It's also the meaning that we, the people in 1788-89, during the ratification process, we, the people who were debating over the meaning of the Constitution in the 1790s and early 1800s, we, the people today, give this Constitution a democratic meaning, and hence it is a democratic document. Thank you.
Freedom 101 is made possible by generous support from the University of Oklahoma Alumni Association. Freedom 101 is a program of the Institute for the American Constitutional Heritage at the University of Oklahoma. For more videos and podcasts, visit freedom.ou.edu.